My name is Pam and I like to knit nerdy things. Today I'm going to show you how to knit a murdered crewmate or a murderable crewmate. For this project, you will need 3 balls of 50-gram yarn in the color of your choice for your crewmate, another color either in red or a lighter shade of the same color you've used for your crewmate, and a white. You will also need a set of 4 double-pointed needles in size US 6, 4 millimeter. Other materials you'll need for this project are scissors, a darning needle, a stitch marker, measuring tape, a row counter, and possibly 3 strong magnets and fabric glue if you're going to make a murderable crewmate versus a regular murdered crewmate. I will give you tips for both options later on in the video. So let's get started. We're going to start with the legs. Begin by casting on 6 stitches. The first round, we increase 1 stitch in each stitch to the end of the round. And I did this by knitting in the front and back of the stitch. You now have 12 stitches on your needle. Divide these stitches evenly between the 3 needles. Join in the round and place a marker on the first stitch. You're going to knit all alternating rounds until the increasing is done. So the next round you're going to knit. For the third round, it is another increasing round. You're going to knit 1 stitch and then increase 1 in the next stitch and do that all the way around the row. You now have 18 stitches on your needles. The 4th round, you're going to knit again. For the 5th round, it's another increase round. You're going to knit 2, then increase 1 in the next stitch and repeat around the round. You now have 24 stitches on the needles. Now we are going to knit even until our leg measures 2.5 inches from the cast on edge. It took me about 20 rows or rounds to get to that length. Once the leg is 2.5 inches long, you're going to break the yarn and place those stitches on a couple of needles or a stitch holder. We're going to repeat that same process and make a second leg. Once the second leg is knit, you're going to begin at the mark stitch of the one leg and knit those 24 stitches. Then join the 24 stitches of the second leg and knit around those stitches. Remember to divide these 48 stitches evenly across your 3 needles. The next part is a little bit easier. You're simply going to knit in the round, i.e. knit every row for 20 rows or until your piece measures about 5 inches from the bottom of the legs. Once your murdered crewmate is 5 inches in length, you're going to bind off knitwise. If you're going to make a murderable crewmate, you'll need to make the head. So to make the head, you're going to cast on 48 stitches. Then knit every row or every round for 10 rounds. You could knit about 20 rounds. I did 10, and I felt like I could have used about 10 more rounds just to make the head a little bit taller. Then you're going to decrease to shape the top of the head. The first decrease round, you are going to knit 6, then knit 2 together all the way around the round. You're going to end up with 42 stitches on the needles. For the second and all alternating rounds, you're going to knit. For the third round, you will knit 5, then knit 2 together all the way around. leaving 36 stitches on the needles. The fourth round, you're going to knit. The fifth round, you're going to knit 4, then knit 2 together all the way around the round, leaving 30 stitches on the needles. Continue decreasing in this manner until 12 stitches are left on the needles. Then you're going to break the yarn and thread it through the remaining stitches to bind off the head. Okie dokie, now that we have the head and body knit, we're going to knit the inside of the body parts. So the inside of the body part, you can either make them red, like I did, or you can use a lighter shade of the color that you use to knit your body with. I believe for Among Us Canon, their inside of their body is actually just a lighter shade of the color of the crewmate. So to make that top piece, you'll need to make 2 of them. Use 2 of your double pointed needles and cast on 4 stitches. You are going to increase 1 stitch in the first and last stitch of all knitted rows. And I increased by knitting in the front and back of that first stitch, knitting to the last stitch and knitting in the front and back. And then purling the alternating rows. And then continue in this manner until you have 16 stitches on your needles. Then you're going to purl 1 row, knit 1 row, and purl 1 row. Then you are going to decrease, and we're going to decrease by slip knitting the first 2 stitches. Then you're going to knit to the last 2 stitches and knit those last 2 stitches together. And you will purl all alternating rows. So the next round you will slip knit to the last 2 stitches and knit those 2 stitches together. Repeat this until you have 4 stitches on the needles. After you have finished a decreasing row, so a knit row, then you are going to bind off purlwise. At this point, you can stuff your crewmate's legs and head, then sew on the inner body pieces. I used a combination of shoulder seam stitch and mattress stitch to sew these pieces on the crewmate to create more of an invisible seam. If you want to make your crewmate parts interchangeable, glue on a magnet to the wrong side of each red inside body part piece with fabric glue before sewing the pieces onto the body and head. Just make sure the magnets are glued on so that their poles are attracted to each other, i.e. they stick together because of magnetism. I used magnets that I pried out of some clip fridge magnets. They were strong enough to connect to one another even through the yarn. To knit the backpack or the oxygen container, you're going to make a rectangle by casting on 16 stitches. Then knit in stockinette stitch for 40 rows. So you're going to knit 1 row and purl the next row for 40 rows. Then bind off knitwise. Sew up the backpack seam. I did this by folding the rectangle so the right sides were facing and just sewed up the seam. Flipped it inside out, stuffed it, and sewed up that remaining seam. Then you can sew the backpack to the body. The face mask is knit with the white yarn. You'll want to cast on 4 stitches. Increase in the first and last stitch. So knit front back, then knit 2, then knit in the front and the back of the last stitch. Purl all alternating rows. Increase by knitting in the front and back of the first and last stitches of your rows, of your knit rows, until you reach 12 stitches on the needles. Then knit in stockinette stitch for 6 rows. Then we're going to decrease by slip knitting the first 2 stitches, knit to the last 2 stitches and knitting those 2 stitches together. Purl all alternating rows of the decrease rows, and all knit rows decrease by slip knitting the first 2 stitches and the last 2 stitches together by knitting 2 together until 4 stitches remain on the needles. Then you're going to bind off purlwise. This is where I felt like making the head a bit longer would have helped, because the face mask is the pattern that I used for the other crewmates that I had made, and it worked out perfectly fine for this pattern. But just because of the way the head got sewn together, it overhanged a little bit, which is fine because when it's together, it sort of hangs down over the body, so it kind of hides a little bit of the seam underneath. But you can experiment with it and make your head a little bit taller if you want. Now for the bone. So make 2 of these, cast on 8 stitches, knit in stockinette stitch for 12 rows, then increase by knitting in the front and back of the first and last stitches of all knit rows until there are 16 stitches on the needle. Then knit in stockinette stitch again for 4 rows. Then you're going to begin decreasing the top of the bone by decreasing one side of the top. So we're going to split the stitches we have on here in half and do just one side here. You're going to do that by slip knitting, then knit 4, and then knit 2 together. So you're going to decrease the first 8 stitches of that round, then turn, keeping the remaining stitches on the needle, and purl the next row. Then slip knit, knit 2, then knit 2 together, purl back, and bind off those 4 stitches. Then break the yarn, join the yarn for the remaining stitches, and decrease in the same manner. Then I sewed up the 2 bone pieces using mattress stitch. The next step is to stuff the bone. Then we're going to knit a little piece that's going to go on the bottom of the bone here. Again, taking 2 of your double pointed needles, cast on 2 stitches, knit in the front and back of those 2 stitches, creating 4 stitches. Then purl the next row, and you will purl all alternating rows. Knit in the front and back and knit 2, and knit in the front and back of the next row, then purl. For the next increase row, you will knit in the front back, knit 4, knit in the front and back again, and then purl. Then we are going to decrease as we have been by slip, slip, knitting, knitting 4, knitting 2 together, purl in the next row in all alternating rows, decreasing again by slip, slip, knitting, knitting 2, then knitting 2 together, purling again, in the last decrease row you're going to slip, slip, knit, then knit 2 together, then bind off purlwise. At this point, you can glue another magnet to the bottom of the bone by gluing it on with fabric glue to this piece before sewing it to the bottom of the bone. If not, you'll just want to sew that bottom piece onto the bone and sew the bone to the body. You could probably also skip this little bottom piece if you were just sewing it directly to the body, because you could just sew the edges of the bone that you made directly to the top of the crewmate. And that's it. Now you've made a murderable crewmate. My name is Pam. This is Total Pamerky. If you want more fun, nerdy knitted content like this, consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day, and we'll see you next time. Bye.